Welcome to You've Got This with Sarah Hamaker, a podcast to encourage and equip moms along their parenting journey. Join Sarah each week as she interviews dads and moms like you and discusses the joys, challenges, and rewards of raising kids.
Hi, and welcome to this week's You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and I'm so glad you joined me. Today, I have Elizabeth Behrens with me. She is originally from Iowa, but now lives in Kansas City with her husband and 4 children. And she has a job she loves as ambassador, educator, and engagement coordinator for Be the Bridge, a nonprofit organization founded by Latasha Morrison that is equipping people to increase racial literacy and work toward racial reconciliation. And I love that, Elizabeth, because I think, as we all know, if we ever just turn on the news on Facebook or on TV or the radio or pick up a newspaper, race is a conversation that we need to be prepared to have.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere right now.
Yeah, but as parents, it can be hard to have those conversations, no matter the color of your skin or your ethnic background. It can be hard to bring up race. Why is it so hard for us to talk about that?
You know, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I particularly work with white parents a lot because for us, a lot of us grew up in an era of the 80s and 90s, and the idea of color blindness was all the rage at the time. And our parents were told, you know, don't talk about race. And so we're sort of starting from scratch. We're not looking to how our parents modeled doing this for us and building from that. We're really starting from the ground up with this modern era we're in. We're in a much different time than we were as kids, with social media and internet and the news being minute to minute and not just on nightly. We're just in a totally different situation than we grew up in. And so we don't know where to start oftentimes.
Right. And I think it also, you're in the Midwest and I'm on the East Coast. And I think it also can be where you are. I mean, I grew up in a very small town in Southern Virginia. Now, there just weren't many people of color. In my town. In the surrounding areas is a heavily African American population. But when I look at how my kids and just their classrooms at school, I think our elementary school did a count of how many languages were spoken there, and it was like dozens of languages.
Yeah. Our kids are growing up in hopefully in some more diverse environments. But that doesn't, even when there's diversity around them, we're afraid to teach them something that's going to backfire, or that they're going to say something really awkward in public or inappropriate to their friend who is a different race than them. We're just really scared of saying the wrong thing, and then in turn of our kids saying the wrong thing and hurting someone unintentionally.
Right. And I do think that sometimes because we're so afraid, we won't have those conversations. Like you're saying, we just kind of say, well, they have friends. We don't need to talk about it, which is, of course, not quite the right approach. And I will say that one thing I loved about hearing my kids talk about their different friends, because when they were younger, they would ask more questions about it. And hopefully we encourage them that, you can be friends with whoever you want to connect with. But sometimes they would ask those kind of awkward questions. So how do you kind of move beyond the awkward into, because it's uncomfortable. We don't want to talk, like you said, we don't want to talk about race like it matters, but it does matter.
It does matter. And I think we got to start with understanding that, first off, that it does matter, and that our children are actually developing an understanding of race, whether or not we're speaking into it. And so the reality is we have the option to either let them develop those ideas without adult supervision and assistance, or to develop them with a helping hand and a knowledgeable eye. And I think we know with most things with parenting that if it's up to our kids to come up with the right way to view the world, they're going to come up with some strange things. They're going to have ways of viewing the world that that need spoken into. And so what we know from studies, though, is that our children aren't colorblind, first off. They do, like you said, your children noticed the different races of children around them. And that's not wrong. We would hope that our children are aware of the world around them. That's not something we want to stifle in them. We want them to have wide open eyes, looking at the world around them and making sense of it. We don't want to cut them off to thinking about all the different kinds of people that God made on this earth.
Right.
That's a great positive thing. But the problem is that we also know that by about the age of 7, children really start to develop some racial bias. And now that gets parents really defensive when I use that word, because people assume I'm saying that their 7-year-old is racist. I'm not saying your 7-year-old is racist. I'm saying that by the age of 7, kids have, at that age, kids love to put things in boxes.
Yes.
So in the same way that you have to convince your 4-year-old that the man with long hair is a man and not a woman, because they're saying, no, I made this nice, tidy box that women dress this way, have this kind of hair, present this way. We have to help them see that not everything fits in those boxes. So just like they're making gender boxes, they're making racial boxes as well. And so when we say bias, we mean they're putting people in categories. That's how children make sense of the world. They file things into categories. And that is normal and that is natural. But that doesn't mean that those categories are good, that they've put proper labels on those categories. And so there's actually a woman that did an amazing study. Her last name is Vittrup, and she wanted to see how children viewing, regular television programming such as Sesame Street, where Sesame Street might intentionally have a scene where there's children, where there is a Black and an Asian and a Hispanic and a white child all working together and playing together. And she kind of wanted to see how things like that would affect children's attitudes towards race. But really what came out of it was something much different. In her initial assessment, she asked white children a series of questions. She asked them, how many white people are nice? How many white people are honest? How many Black people are nice? How many Black people are pretty? She had these young elementary age children answer these questions, and their parents had assumptions that, the children of course didn't think differently about people based on race. But what she actually found was that for instance, when asked how many white people are mean, the most common answer was almost none. But when asked how many Black people are mean, the most common answers were some or a lot.
Wow.
And that really threw parents. There was also 14% of the children said that their parents don't like Black people.
Oh, wow.
And 38% said they didn't know. Well, the problem was, the parents had used really common language that we use around race. Everyone is equal. God made us all different. But at the same time, the parents were not friends with people who looked different than them. They didn't have Black families over to their home for dinner. That's not who their parents were associating with. And so as the children were filing away in those boxes, what does it mean to be these different things they saw from their parents? Oh, my parents aren't friends with Black or Hispanic or Asian people. So they made assumptions about where those people fit in different boxes. Now, the great thing that came out of that study, though, was she gave the parents all different ways to approach this, from just watching these videos to watching these videos and asking questions afterward, or to just asking questions. And she found that across the board, there really wasn't improvement in some of that bias, except for in 6 families. Out of all these children, there were 6 families where there was a significant increase in positive attitudes about different racial groups. And in each of those 6 groups, the only thing that was different was that instead of just using those general platitudes or, checking off boxes of, okay, I mentioned that we can be friends with Black people.
Right.
Those 6 families had deep meaningful conversations about race. And those are the only children that were able to break out of those boxes they had put different racial groups into and actually start to view the world more the way that we hope or think that our children are viewing the world.
Wow, that's really fascinating, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's why it's one of my favorite studies.
Yeah.
Children.
Yeah.
Because it shows us we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to worry that talking about race is what will make our children racist or that if we just, we don't have to guess what's the best thing to do. We know study after study shows us that having meaningful, open conversations about race is what leads to children who are most able to navigate a multiracial world without deep prejudice or bias.
Right. And that's, for some of us who maybe live in areas that, there's not a lot of racial diversity, it's good to know that having those conversations is, you can have an impact on how our children view the world. I mean, that is really encouraging. And also, I hope will help our listeners to, have those conversations with their kids, and share some of their own, I would assume, history about it. Because like you said, I mean, we were brought up to think, oh, wow, we just didn't ignore people's skin color.
Yes.
and there's some truth to that because we're all essentially kind of the same on the inside, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. But like you were saying, there are those inherent differences as well, and just culturally and ethnically and
Absolutely. And I also love helping children see, I know in our home we use the phrase Imago Dei a lot, this idea that we're created in the image of God. And we love talking about that, and that we talk about how God is, where each human is made in the image of God. And God is so, so big and so amazing that you couldn't just have one picture of him with one kind of person. That God has wanted to show himself to be so amazing and so beautiful that he needed all these different skin tones and cultures and backgrounds to fully show us how big and amazing he is. And kids from a young age can really latch on to that idea that, God is so big that he needed that me and this person who look totally different than me both show what God looks like, because he can't be summed up with just a tiny picture.
Yeah. And that is a beautiful way to kind of, encourage our children, no matter what their ages are, to look at the world and go, wow, just like there's so many colors in nature, there's, we have that color palette almost in humans as well. And just the different, we can even expand beyond race to body types and socioeconomic stuff. I mean, it makes us, I think, appreciate all the creativity that we see in others.
Absolutely. And we just, on that idea of expanding it, we just had a conversation yesterday with our son who, he's in first grade. And at that age, there were some kids starting to pick on some other kids related to body size. And we used that same descriptor. God is so big and amazing that he gave us every body type, every size and shape and color and hair texture. And when we're making fun of someone based on how they look, we're saying this piece of the image of God is worth making fun of. And so we continue to use that language, not just with race, but across the board to help our children understand this beautiful world that God made for us.
And I think too is how we react, to the friends our kids bring home as well. Absolutely. We've always tried to have a very open house. I love it when kids come over. Sometimes I'll come upstairs. My office is in the basement, especially like during the summer, and there'll be some, non-family member kids.
Yeah. If it's like my house, neighborhood.
Yeah.
Coming in for snacks. My grocery bill in the summer is a little crazy.
Right. I'm like, open hand, let's be generous. And it's a beautiful thing. But what's also been fun is that, they come from all different backgrounds and, all different races, really.
Yeah.
And that it's been really a lot of fun to, welcome them and to see my children having those friendships that I didn't get a chance to have simply because of where I grew up.
Yeah.
And just that cultural experience and how they seem so natural with it in a lot of ways.
Yes. Well, it's so great with kids because, while they're aware of those color differences, they haven't yet, completely put the same prejudices on them. I mean, we showed earlier how there is some, but especially children that have friends across various races, you have a lower chance of that child just making assumptions about people of a different race because they have an example of a person of that race right there in front of them that plays video games and baseball with them. And, they see people of that race as fully human because they are experiencing people in their life who look like that are fully human and that aren't just a caricature or a media portrayal.
Right. And I think that, as we continue to have these conversations with our kids, about race, about other issues that come up related to that, I think it's so important for us as parents to make sure that we're not shutting ourselves off from potential friendships or potential interactions.
Absolutely. Like I said, a lot of those children were developing, assumptions about their parents' views on race based on who were their parents interacting with. Who did their parents value asking over for dinner or being, working on friends with? And that can be shaped by a lot of things too. If, I've worked with some families who they live in diverse areas, but they realize that, they chose a school for their kids that was actually almost all white. And then they went to church on Sunday at a church that was predominantly white as well. And they had to think through, and therefore their friendships were, the parents' friendships were predominantly with white families. And so they had to figure out what message is that sending their kids that we're surrounded by people that look different than us, yet we're choosing to invest in people that look the same as us. And that our children are developing ideas about the world based on those things they see.
Right. And I think it's just, again, important for us as parents to, keep those things in mind. We can have all the conversations in the world we want to, but if they see us not taking advantage of opportunities.
Yes.
I know there's certain areas of the country where it's harder than others just based on geography and who lives where. But when we have those opportunities, are we inviting our kids' friends' parents into our home when the opportunity arises? Are we trying to, include them in our circle, in thinking of those and trying to offer those opportunities? Because
well, I think as parents, we realize we only have, I know personally, at least, I'm sure you're the same. I only have so much space in my life when it comes to people I can really invest in as far as friendships go, because between running around to kid events and work and school and all, I only have so many hours in the day. So I've chosen to be really strategic about which friendships I invest in and where I'm putting my time and energy, because I do value my children not seeing that all my only close friends are all white. That's not a value I want to instill in them. And that's not a value I want for myself either. Just as I teach my children that we see the image of God in every type of person, I feel like we better understand the world and we better understand God when we have a variety of people in our lives. And I want that for me, not just for them.
Right. And I think that's, a great point to think about, because we do want to make sure that our lives are being enriched by all the kind of people that God has created, and not taking, the easy way and just and like you said, we don't have to have deep conversations with everyone we meet, but there are opportunities, I think, that we just kind of brush off that we could be a little more strategic at.
Yeah, it's easy to stay in our comfort zone and stick with which friendships are easiest and most natural for us. And often that's with people that are most like us. And oftentimes that falls along racial lines as well.
Yeah. Well, we're almost at the end of our time, Elizabeth. Is there anything else about talking about race with kids that you want to slip in?
Yeah, it's, we keep saying have these meaningful conversations. Well, what does that look like for families that are new to this? I would say a few things. First, it's going to take parents educating themselves on, the racial history in America, what's currently going on. If we don't have a foundation to teach from, we're going to be floundering. And if you have older children, let them learn alongside you. Watch a great documentary together. Read a book together. Those are great options to show them that you value this for them and for yourself. But with little children, we start really simple. Besides the talk we do about the image of God, we also talk about something as basic as melanin. Melanin is the pigment in our skin that determines which shade of brown you are. From what we call white, which is actually a very peachy light brown, all the way to very dark brown. And all that's different in our skin is how much melanin is there. Kids can make sense of that. They understand quantity of something. So helping them see that that's basically the difference. But I also say, practice these conversations when your children are too young to even understand what you're talking about. Yeah. Because if you grow up being told to be completely silent about race and you haven't really talked about race your whole adult life, it's going to be uncomfortable at first. It's really okay to practice talking to yourself, practice talking to your infant child, until you get to a place where you feel like you can have this, where you can talk about race without tripping over every other word. And you can also, one of my favorite recommendations for parents on any kind of tough topic is find some great children's books. There are wonderful children's books out there about race. We love The Colors of Us and The Skin You Live In. Both of them are kid-friendly, talk about all the different skin tones and colors the world comes in, and bring it up in a way where it opens the conversation and children feel able to talk about it and don't think it's an off-topic conversation.
Yeah, literature is one of my favorite go-tos as a parent because, there are some wonderful books out there about any topic and race included. So
absolutely.
I'm sure your public librarian, resource librarian, would be more than happy to direct you to some age-appropriate literature books that can get a conversation started. Do a book study this summer on some racial topics to kind of get that started if you're wondering, especially if you have older kids, on how to tackle this.
Absolutely. And my last bit would be I find that it's easier for people to talk about race than it is to talk about racism, but that we really have to talk about both. We start with young kids just talking about race, but as they start to get into elementary school, we teach the concept of racism by starting back in a lot of our country's history and seeing how it's carried forward today, the way that some of this racism is really baked into the structures and the institutions of our country, and how the effects of our country's history of racism still plays out today. And children aren't too young to start to grasp that. Let's not be afraid to give them the whole honest truth. Just like we don't read our children the Bible and skip over the flood or skip over the crucifixion because, those are really kind of gruesome, hard parts of history. Well, they're true and they're meaningful and they shape the way we view the world. So let's not try to shine up our own country's history either.
Oh, that's a really great point, Elizabeth. And these are wonderful suggestions, so thank you. I think these will definitely help us all to have more meaningful conversations about race. You've been listening to You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hammaker, and I've been talking today with Elizabeth Behrens. She and her husband live in the Midwest with their 4 children, and she's also an ambassador, educator, and engagement coordinator for Be the Bridge, a nonprofit organization that helps people to talk about race and work toward racial reconciliation. Thank you for joining me, and I hope I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast of You've Got This with Sarah Hamaker. Sign up to receive notification of new podcasts and listen to previous editions at sarahhamaker.com. Until next time, remember, parenting might be hard sometimes, but don't worry, you've got this.